Well, hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Christine Rovner, Senior Program Manager with the Science and Technology Policy Fellowships Program. My portfolio includes fellows and offices in several executive branch agencies, as well as the Congressional Science and Engineering Fellows, the cornerstone of the Stpf program, and the focus of today's webinar. Celebrating our 50th anniversary, the Congressional Science and Engineering Fellows Program has helped shape America's future by bringing accomplished scientists and engineers with an interest in policy and politics to utilize their expertise in public service. These fellows have the opportunity to learn about and contribute to the policymaking processes in Congress. Fellows spend 1 year serving members of Congress or congressional committees in areas that would benefit from scientific and technical analysis and perspective. The program started in 1973-74 with just 7 fellows serving in Congress from 4 sponsoring societies: AAAS, American Physical Society, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and IEEE USA. This year, 2 fellows from AAAS joined 29 other fellows who were selected in rigorous national competitions that measure their accomplishments in science or engineering discipline, their communication skills and leadership capacity, and their interest in public policy and the political process. Today, fellows are selected and sponsored by a large network of national science and engineering societies spanning a wide range of disciplines, including biology, physics, education, psychology, health, environmental engineering, and more. 2 of today's panelists, Sonia and Raleigh, were both sponsored by partner societies. For the upcoming application cycle that closes on November 1st of this year, AAAS will sponsor 3 fellows in Congress, including our new Climate Science Fellow. Applicants with a background in ocean or climate science are eligible for this new legislative branch fellowship placement. All congressional fellows will start in their offices in September 2023 and will complete their fellowships in August 2024. Fellows may work on many issues, including climate change, healthcare, agriculture, cybersecurity, transportation, energy, immigration, biotechnology, STEM education, and national and international security, to name just a few. To help fellows secure a placement, AAAS solicits position descriptions from offices on Capitol Hill to provide a starting point for identifying an office for the fellowship year. Fellows may reach out to these offices or any other congressional offices that interest them to find a mutually good fit for their interests and skills. We consider all fellows under the fellowship umbrella to be free agents who select a placement assignment and work in a host office without direction, influence, or an agenda from AAAS or their sponsoring society. AAAS provides ongoing guidance, support, and professional development opportunities throughout the fellowship year for all congressional fellows. So today we'll begin by hearing from our panelists, who will join me on screen now. Later in the conversation, we'll take your questions. To submit your questions to the panel, click the question box in your menu as shown on the screen. When you do, you can indicate the person or people to whom your question is directed. Remember, you can put questions in at any time today. So with that short introduction to the program, I'd like to turn to our alumni who can share more about their experiences as scientists and engineers serving in Congress. Please join me in welcoming Anya Brandon, Raleigh Martin, and Mai Nguyen, who is joining us by phone. Each panelist will introduce themselves and share a little about what drew them to the fellowship program and where they serve their fellowship. Mai, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm calling in by phone, but my name is Mai Nguyen. I was a AAAS fellow last year, and my background is in cognitive psychology. During my fellowship, I worked with Congressman Derek Kilmer from Washington State, which is also where I grew up, and focused on healthcare, agriculture, science, and a little bit of indigenous issues. The reason I'm on my phone right now and not on camera is my office actually hired me on after the end of my fellowship, and votes were just called, and I'm actually en route to meeting a group to bring them to the House floor. So it's a little bit of a hectic day and get a little taste of what it's like to be a fellow. Just really briefly, what really attracted me to this fellowship was this opportunity to use these kinds of skills that you develop in my graduate education towards solving real world problems. I got really interested in mental health issues, sexual misconduct issues, and so on as a graduate student. Then went on to work in state government in New Jersey and was just delighted to make this jump to the federal government and on the congressional side.
Thanks so much for that, Mai, and we're glad you can join us for as long as you can. Anya, I saw you nodding. You understand, you remember this. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Can you hear me, Christine? Awesome. Well, great to be with you all today. My name is Dr. Anya Brandon. I am the U.S. Plastics Policy Analyst at Ocean Conservancy currently, where I lead all of our state and federal work looking at plastics. I served as the AGU AAAS Fellow in Senator Merkley's office 2 years ago now, man, time flies, working on all of his water, ocean, and a little bit of his climate portfolio, namely looking at plastics there, which is also what I studied in grad school. I was really drawn to the fellowship because I realized I wanted to tackle these kind of large systemic issues, kind of using my science and my background and expertise there, but looking at how we can have a larger, more immediate impact kind of on a systems-wide scale. And I was chuckling and nodding along because I too am in the House building at the moment. I am sitting on a stairwell and joining you from running around the Hill, getting to talk to representatives about some of our plastic policies.
Little did we know that our panelists were going to have in the moment experiences on the Hill during our webinar. Well, thanks, Anya, for that intro. And Raleigh, it looks like you're not in a House office right now.
Yes, good afternoon or good morning, depending where you may be. My name is Raleigh Martin. My background is in the earth and environmental sciences, specifically geomorphology. That's the study of earth surface landforms. The reason I did the Congressional Fellowship, I was actually already a AAAS STPF Executive Branch Fellowship at the National Science Foundation, which is actually where I currently work now. And I became very interested in the bigger picture of how funding is directed to federal agencies and how federal agencies are governed, legislatively, because Congress affects everything that we do. And so during my fellowship, which was sponsored by the American Geosciences Institute, AGI, I was placed with the House Select Committee on the climate crisis, which is a bit different than a typical congressional committee. It does not have formal legislative jurisdiction, but instead it kind of has an overarching role in developing climate policy legislative proposals for the House of Representatives. And so that's what I did during my fellowship year, primarily focusing on issues related to climate resilience and climate science. So very much drawing on my background. Let me see. I think that answers the main questions. Happy to answer more as we go. And as you can see, I'm not on the Hill, so therefore my time is a little bit more leisurely right now.
Well, thank you all for joining us this afternoon or this morning, wherever you are. And let's dip into, one of the things that surprised you most in your time working in the Congressional Fellowship. Who wants to share?
I guess I can jump in. So a simple one is simply the breadth of AAAS fellows in government. And I've experienced this both in the executive branch, but also in the legislative branch. So the committee that I was working for, our staff director was a former STPF congressional fellow. I had a colleague who was a former STPF congressional fellow, and I think we might have had a congressional fellow the subsequent year. So definitely it's a major pipeline of folks with scientific expertise into congressional positions.
I can jump in. I think one of the things that surprised me most is the speed of the work and how exciting that can be. You know, I think I used to think of projects on the time scale of months or years coming from a PhD that did take about 5 years. And so everything was, you know, a slower and more leisurely, really allowed time to study in depth the nuances of each and every issue I cared about in a paper or in a project, and just not having the capacity to do that for every single subject while you're on the Hill, and then learning the skills to, you know, using the same skills we had doing research in the sciences to figure out, you know, how can you very quickly read information, distill it down, and, you know, share that out with the rest of the office in a way that's understandable.
Yeah, speed and distilling information is the name of the game for most of our fellows. And Mai, anything to share about what surprised you during your time on the Hill in your first year?
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, I just got updated instructions on where to meet my people, so I had to reroute. I think one of the most surprising things for me was just the breadth of things that you have to do. I'm on the House side, and House staffs are shockingly small. So we have a legislative team of about 5 or 6 people. That's considered quite large by the House standards. And that means that I cover, you know, only 4 or 5 issues as opposed to like 10, which might be the typical legislative assistant issue set. And really on the House, what that means is that you're doing everything. You are writing press releases, you're writing memos, you're doing legislation, you're responding to constituent mail. There's just, you know, 100 different things that you are responsible for, and learning how to prioritize and manage that is a real skill that you'll develop in the fellowship. The other thing that actually kind of surprised me, people are so, and sorry, I shouldn't say this surprised me, but people on the Hill are so smart and they are so competent. I like have never worked with such smart and competent and amazing like 24-year-olds fresh out of college and who know the legislative process in and out. And so I think there's a little bit of humility that comes with being a fellow. Yes, you do have all of these amazing technical and scientific backgrounds, but you're comparatively a novice at this, and that's a big learning curve as well.
And Mai, while I have you on, would you like to maybe share with our audience what you consider to be your greatest accomplishment from your fellowship year, which I think was pretty significant?
Yeah, absolutely. So this also goes along with one of the previous question. One of the things that I learned and was surprised about in working on the Hill is that legislation is only one thing that you do, one part of what you do. There's an enormous range of other things that we do, like writing letters and engaging with agencies and trying to push them to make changes that they have the authority to do already, but for whatever reason are currently not. And so it's using this kind of engagement with the federal government that I was able to tackle this really big issue in our district, which had to do with the amount Medicare was paying a certain type of rural hospital to provide primary care services and other types of services in rural communities. And a few years ago, Medicare had established a rule that had cut these reimbursement rates by about 60%, and that had a devastating effect in rural communities. It might have made sense in urban ones, but it really didn't for us. And so one of my major projects this past year was really diving deep into this issue, finding the data, finding the evidence, putting together all the stakeholder groups, and then writing to CMS and say, hey, we have this proposal. We think it's really great. We're asking you to create an exception for this type of hospital. It'll impact this number of hospitals, this number of patients, and will cost this amount. And to kind of our total complete excitement, CMS basically full stop took that policy recommendation that we wrote to them in a letter and included it in their summer proposed update to how they'll pay hospitals next year. And for us, what this means is that our rural hospitals in our district will be getting about $50 million more in reimbursement over the next 10 years. And nationally, that'll be something around the level of $300 million. And it's just been this incredible experience where you just keep pushing and you keep pushing and keep pushing, and eventually you might find that tool that opens up a solution.
Well, thanks for that, and illustrating how serving the needs of a district on a smaller scale with the House is actually servicing also the needs of a lot of communities across the United States. Raleigh, I think we probably saw the fruit of your committee's work mostly this summer with some of the climate legislation that finally came through. But during your fellowship, what do you consider to be your most significant accomplishment?
Yeah, so, and actually related to what you just mentioned, we as a committee, one of our biggest tasks during my fellowship year was to prepare a report to all of the committees of Congress, basically recommending legislative actions to address the climate crisis. We were intended to put this report out in March of 2020. Of course, we were overtaken by events and we ended up postponing that report release to June of 2020. But I was very proud to have, a significant hand in writing sections of that report, primarily on climate science and climate resilience, as I mentioned. And the interesting thing with the Hill is that it's fast-paced, but also sometimes you play the long game. You plant seeds, knowing that maybe in the current political conditions, it's not necessarily possible to see something to fruition, but seeing the recent passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which contains significant provisions in advancing policies to address the climate crisis, and seeing the direct through line from aspects of the report that we provided in June of 2020 to the passage of that bill a few months ago this year, that was very satisfying to see that progress, even if I was not there at the exact time when the bill was passed. Seeing the kind of long-term fruits of that labor was very satisfying.
Excellent point, Raleigh. And thanks very much for your work on the committee to get us the language in the Inflation Reduction Act that's going to help us all globally even. And Anya, I know you had some really terrific accomplishments in your short time in Murphy's office too.
Yeah, really echoing Raleigh's point where, things move really, really quickly and then also very slowly at the same time. And the, one thing that surprised me and that I learned a lot about is just the interplay between state and federal, and really leveraging policies that have been tried and tested at the state level, trying them at the federal level, and then seeing them trickle back down, and which is something I got to witness. I helped with the reintroduction of the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. I'm really trying to address our plastic pollution crisis, and overall, reform and reshape our recycling system in the United States to meet the needs of this moment. While we were unsuccessful in moving the bill much further than introduction, at least on the Senate side, the House side had a hearing, it was great. We were able to introduce it with more co-sponsors, do some of that education, and then we were able to leverage a lot of the policy that we had tried and tested in Break Free in a recent state level win that I helped negotiate and write in California, which is California's SB 54 Act, which is also all about tackling our plastic pollution crisis. And so being able to see just how impactful the state and the federal action working in parallel can be to really move the needle on some of these monumental issues.
Thanks for that. And just to kind of continue the discussion about climate science and making an impact, what advice would you have, Anya, to share with an ocean or a climate scientist who wants to have an impact on policy through this fellowship?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to anyone who's interested in trying to, figure out if it makes sense or if you can really use your skill set, I would say absolutely apply. You can definitely use your skill set. And I would say there's a real hunger and an appetite on the Hill for experts who can help, especially in climate and the ocean really in particular. There's a real lack of expertise across the Hill. And it's such a big issue, whether we're talking about fishing, science, aquaculture, plastics, drinking water, wastewater, all of these issues are so interconnected and are often just one sliver of a portfolio that someone has to work on, you know, probably in natural resources, ocean, water, plastic, and climate. So really having some of that expertise to help an office champion some of these issues is greatly needed, and would absolutely recommend anyone who's interested apply. I think it really, personally for my career, enabled me to see that there's options outside of academia to have that immediate and lasting impact.
Thanks for that. And Raleigh, you also had a climate-focused fellowship on the Hill. What would you recommend for an ocean or climate scientist who wants to consider working this fellowship?
Yeah, so speaking generally, and I think this would apply to the Congressional Fellowship, the Executive Branch Fellowship, or frankly, any mode of engagement of ocean climate scientists, whether it's at the local level, state level, with nonprofits, because I think there's all sorts of ways in which you can engage. I think it's really important to think about how you can be a resource, which doesn't necessarily mean finding the coolest way to package what you learn from your research, because frankly, compared to the breadth of issues that the world is facing, most likely the topic of your research was very narrow in scope. And it's important just to recognize that most of what you gain from being a researcher is not just the specific subject matter expertise, but it's the scientific mindset and the scientific approach and the broader context and understanding of those issues. So just being willing to engage with those stakeholders and those interests who are hungering for ocean and climate knowledge to inform the decisions they're making, but don't really know where to begin because they don't come from that scientific background. And instead of coming in with an a priori expectation of, here's what they need to hear, coming in without, specific expectation and just being willing to listen and understand the issues that folks are facing, and then to provide your knowledge and your skills accordingly based on the circumstances.
Excellent point. I really appreciate that. Making yourself to be a resource more broadly. Sometimes even pushing the edges of your expertise, but bringing your scientific skills to work at the Hill. And Mai, if you're still on, I don't know if you have anything more you'd like to share about, directed toward ocean or climate scientists, or if you maybe want to share a little bit about the placement process. How do you identify those places on the Hill that are going to most benefit from your skills?
Yeah, I'm still here and I can definitely speak to that. I think just really briefly adding to what both Anya and Raleigh said, you also don't have to find a placement in your specific area. Portfolios are so large and change so rapidly, you'll likely wind up doing things far outside your scientific expertise anyway. So if you are, for example, interested in healthcare and taxes, definitely the opportunity is there for you. So I think that willingness to explore other areas is also a really great mindset to bring to the Hill. On the second question about the placement process, I know Christine will go into the actual process in more detail, but it's actually, it's not unlike, the Hill is not unlike an academic department in that each office, just like a lab, tends to operate relatively autonomously. And so the culture, the environment, the work practices, the mentorship from one office can be completely different from another office. And just like in academia, we say, choose a mentor, not the project. I think that's the best piece of advice we can give you for the placement process. Look for the best mentor or the office environment where you feel the most comfortable and feel the most supported and think that you'll get what you want from this. For me, it was a personal connection. I'm from Washington State. I felt like I'd have opportunity to work on mental health issues that really mattered to me. I would have a supported and cool environment of people who are really supportive and experienced in this area. But those criteria that you're making your choice on is entirely up to you, and there isn't really a right or wrong way to prioritize things.
That's an excellent reminder that as fellows come to the Hill, they are free agents, as I indicated in my opening remarks, to choose whatever pathway is really best for you to, as you are seeking a fulfill your fellowship goals. And finding an office is going to benefit from your skills. Raleigh, I don't know if you recall your placement process from way back when, but any other things you'd like to share with our audience about finding a good placement on the Hill?
Yeah, so the placement process is a bit of a whirlwind. I'm not sure if it's currently in an in-person or a virtual environment. I was the last in-person placement before the pandemic. So I think first is just try to relax and just let the experience happen, and don't feel bad if you're not the first among the cohort of fellows who gets a placement. I think in the end, everyone got a placement that they were overall satisfied with. With that said, though, I think echoing what Mai said, the most important thing in the end is being in an office where your skills are really being valued. I think there is, frankly, some variation. I think there are offices where the fellow is really integrated into the overall work of the office and treated like a colleague. And then there are other offices, frankly, where I think the fellow is kind of, more given a project and kind of working on their own. And, that works for some folks, but in my case, I was really keen on being swept fully into the work of the office. And so that was very much a criterion that I looked for in my placement. And I think ultimately I was happy with the choice that I made.
Excellent, thanks for that. And Anya, you were during the pandemic, so that was a little bit more challenging. Fortunately now, this year our fellows were able to interview in person, but offices were also able to take advantage of virtual interviewing if that was going to make things a little bit smoother for scheduling with the fellows. So we were able to sort of do a hybrid situation this year. But Anya, what would you like to share about identifying placements for the fellowship year?
Yeah, absolutely. Doing things virtually made it certainly easier. Did not have to navigate the halls and run back and forth between Hart and Rayburn and Cannon and try to know where everything was, which was really nice. It did make some very long Zoom days, of course. I think the thing I went into the placement week thinking about was, what did I want to get out of my experience? Was I interested in writing and learning about legislation? Was I interested in oversight, writing letters, exercising those skill sets? And for me personally, one thing that I really valued and wanted to get to experience was working with outside stakeholders. I do not think you can get through a AAAS year without doing that in some way, shape, or form. But I really wanted to make sure that was a priority. And so I asked offices about my ability to do that type of stakeholder outreach and really be the face of an office, engaging, asking questions, and doing work with districts or people in our state to understand and listen to what their problems were and how we could work together to solve them. And then, echoing everything Raleigh and May said about choosing the mentor instead of the office or the particular project. It is really about learning an entirely new skill set when you get to the Hill, and being able to work with someone who is interested and engaged in your career and your teaching is going to make it so much more valuable, even if you're working on something completely different than your PhD.
Thanks for that. And just a reminder to folks who are on the webinar today to go ahead and put your questions in the chat box, and we will be taking questions and answering them as we can. Following on your remarks, Anya, we had an interesting question come through about talking about what proportion of the fellowship experience in your office, in your fellowship, was science communication versus compiling information, sort of more research focused. I don't know if Raleigh or Anya, if you want to tackle that question.
Hey, I can hop on. I need to go in just 1 minute, but I would say for me personally, shockingly little. Even though science is part of my portfolio, it's more about science integrated in other areas, like how do we look at our COVID data? How do we look at now monkeypox data, and what is the best practices there? But I frankly don't have the time to do any analysis, to dive into the primary literature, to really do anything other than read the top line recommendations from, say, the CDC or our public health officials. This might be different in different offices, but I would actually say that science communication explicitly is a pretty small part of my work today.
That's a great
And
perspective.
yeah, and I'm so sorry, I need to go, but it's been a real pleasure being here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us, Mai, and good luck with the rest of your afternoon. So Mai had a really good perspective from House member's office, where she indicated the staffs are small and have to be pretty agile. I don't know if Anya, you want to speak from a Senate member's office perspective. I know Raleigh was on a committee, so that might be more different too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm afraid I will also have to jump right after this, but it has been such a pleasure talking with all of you. And Christine, please feel free to share out my information afterwards. I would love to connect with anyone who wants to learn more. In terms of how much science I did on a day-to-day basis, over the entire course of the year, I made one graph for a floor chart for my boss. He loved it. The rest of the office was incredibly impressed that I knew how to color code things to make it match our office's colors and style formatting. So yes, I did do some hard science once. I made a bar graph. But no, in terms of, actually using the science, I think I used my background a lot because I worked on an area that was so similar to my PhD, but was not really engaging with the primary research, with the exception of I was personally interested in science policy and the funding of science and how we can support scientists. So I did take a lot of those meetings with other scientists, which was a real treat. And one of the highlights of my fellowship was getting to talk to other PhD students who are doing Hill meetings, especially during appropriation season, interested in making sure that their programs and their work stays funded. Lots of the same skills I used in my science communication, however, of distilling really complicated detailed information, whether it is on the science or on a wonky legislative topic, into something that's more bite-sized, a talking point, and understandable. So a lot of the same basics apply.
Awesome, thanks for that, Anya. And I know you have to ring off soon, but thanks so much for joining us from the halls of Capitol Hill, and good luck on your visits today.
Thanks. Bye, all.
Bye. And so Raleigh, over to you. Serving on a House committee and specifically the climate crisis committee might have looked a little different in terms of some of these.
Yeah, I would definitely say that committee, relatively speaking, there's a bit more time and space to delve into issues. Of course, not at the level of detail that you would in a scientific job, but definitely, maybe more than you would have in a personal office. So for the climate committee, as we were preparing our report, we spent a lot of time engaging with the Library of Congress, Congressional Research Service, a lot of time engaging with stakeholders, reading reports that they had provided with legislative recommendations. So definitely that kind of compiling info and parsing info was a part of the work. And also communications, frankly, how do we take this knowledge we've gleaned, this understanding of stakeholder priorities, and package that into, say, opening statements or talking points for the chair of our committee on hearings? How do we package that within the language of the legislative report that we prepared? Actually, one interesting experience, which maybe was not typical, but which I enjoyed, we had a hearing where the minority members of the committee designated a witness who wasn't exactly a climate denier, but maybe was a climate minimizer. And so we actually did get to exercise our scientific muscles and help to prepare talking points for our committee chair and committee members to help refute some of those more unfortunate messages that were being purveyed by one of the witnesses on that hearing. So, it's all over the place in the end of the day.
And that goes to a really interesting other question that we've gotten from the audience about working with people, or I guess interacting with people with whom you may disagree with on policy issues or politics. Sort of how often is that coming up, and how have you handled them? You just gave us a good example there. Yeah, you want to reflect on that? You're definitely in the hot seat, I think, for that year.
So, to be honest, as folks are probably aware, Congress, like much of our political sphere, is somewhat polarized. And so I do think in your placement, it is possible to find an office to work with that overall you're kind of on the same page. So I didn't find myself day to day, fighting battles with my colleagues. Sure, we had differences of opinion on specific approaches to specific issues, but fundamentally we were kind of on the same page. And I do think that's important with a placement to find an office that shares your overall values. But within the broader scheme, yes, there's absolutely a lot of disagreement, a lot of polarization. And what I found works the best often is to not necessarily get into specific arguments over the specific points, because I feel like you can't really win those arguments. They're just going to go on and on. But instead to appeal to people's values, to people's principles, and to kind of look at the bigger picture and see where it is that it is possible to find common ground, even if on some of the more contentious issues, you may never be able to come to agreement.
It's good advice for all of us, whether we're working on the Hill or just in our regular offices, right? Marlon, we actually had a question come through for you, reflecting on your experience, because you were both in the executive branch and the legislative branch. Our questioner wants to know how they compare and sort of, what are your takeaways? How are they different from each of those experiences?
Yeah, so of course, the executive branch is a vast and varied experience depending on where you are within the government. But culturally, I mean, one of the biggest differences is simply the pace of work. As a current executive branch employee, the work is faster paced than it was in academia, but it's still much slower paced relative to the work on the Hill. But we also kind of have a different scope of effort. As an executive branch agency, we're kind of prescribed by law and by appropriations to do specific things. And so, the scope of work is relatively narrow compared to what you're doing on the Hill, but also, very significant as well. So I think overall, it's just a different level of experience. I think executive branch, you hone in a little bit more on specific issues, whereas legislative branch tends to be a much more widely varying experience.
Thanks for that. And then, maybe just to wrap up this section of our program in Q&A, is to just ask you to leave off on advice to applicants to make themselves competitive as a legislative branch applicant. These can be pretty competitive, both at AAAS, but also at some of our sponsoring societies. What advice would you give to our applicants to really make their application shine?
Yeah, so it is a bit more complicated to apply for the partner societies than it is to apply for the AAAS STPF executive or legislative branch, because you're tailoring a different application to each of those societies. So first, simply, think carefully about what that society is looking for and tailor your application accordingly. Second, what I would say is that the reason why these societies sponsor congressional fellows is because they want to support folks from their respective scientific communities to develop the skills that they can then be advocates on behalf of those scientific fields. And so don't come into it necessarily thinking you need to have a huge depth of policy experience. I think certainly demonstrating that you have policy interest and that you've done things to show that interest is very important. But the fact that you may have never worked in a policy capacity is completely appropriate. And in fact, I don't think the societies would necessarily want to be supporting people who already have 10 years of Hill experience through the fellowship, because I think they would view that as, we want to transform people's careers and give new people opportunities. So I think viewing the application from that perspective is a good way to set yourself apart from your competitors. And yes, it can be a very competitive process. So, don't be sad if it doesn't work out the first time you apply. Please continue applying in future years.
Thanks for leaving off on that the very hopeful note that we are trying to really bring in scientists who have new and fresh perspectives in public service, and are, as you mentioned, 10-year Hills veterans. It's not what AAAS or any of the sponsoring societies are really looking to bring to the Hill. We're looking to foster new talent and, in addition to bringing scientists and engineers to a place that doesn't really have a lot of that expertise, to make sure that they get that scientific and technical perspective as they're crafting legislation, creating oversight over federal agencies and so on. So I want to thank Raleigh and all of our panelists for joining us today. It's been really terrific hearing about your fellowship experiences and your advice to those who are applying for next year. So I'd like to now invite on screen Jessica Soule, the Stpf Recruitment Director. This is a great segue to talking about the application overview. So stick around to learn how to navigate the legislative branch application and opt in for consideration into the climate science position. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Yeah, echoing thanks to Raleigh and all of our other panelists today. Really feeling so inspired by the conversation. And I'm going to now, for those of you who are planning to apply this year or in a future year, I'd like to share an overview of the Stpf application. And then after that overview, that might take just a few minutes, we'll take your application questions. So if you're eager to apply this year, you have questions, stick around for that. So you can reach the Stpf application on our online application portal. And so that is right here at fellowshipapp.AAAS.org. You can also find it on the AAAS website, or if you're searching the Stpf application portal. And when you go to that website, you're going to see this. It's going to bring you to our online application portal. And as a first-time visitor, you'll click Register Now, that bottom button. And if you're a returning visitor, you will click Login to continue working on an application. And this doesn't only host the application portal, it also hosts all kinds of resources for you, our applicants, about eligibility, a step-by-step application overview, and review criteria, what reviewers are looking for. And so there's a lot of resources housed on the site as well. And if you are registering your account for the first time, you'll be asked to provide information about yourself, including demographic questions, which you can decline to identify. And your primary email address will become your username to log back in again, and our main way of sending you updates. So make sure that you provide an email address that you have permanent access to and that you check on a regular basis. And so once you register your account, you can now click Apply, and you can start your Stpf application for this year's cycle, which closes November 1st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. And once you click that Apply button, you'll enter the application and you'll see Step 1, an eligibility self-check. You'll answer all of the prompts as accurately as you can. And then if you select an option that indicates that you're not eligible to apply this year, an explanation is going to appear in red at the bottom of the page to help you understand either if you're not eligible or if you want to adjust your response. And you can take this self-check for eligibility as many times as needed, and you can update your responses, and you won't be locked out or anything if you don't pass it on the first time. So you can go ahead and edit as needed, and then be sure to save your self-check results. And that once you've passed the self-check, you can't go back and make yourself ineligible. Passing Step 1, eligibility self-check, will bring you to my application homepage, and you will now see steps 2 through 4 of the application. And on the right-hand side, that's where you'll see your progress through each step of the application. And the My Application link in the upper left-hand navigation corner is going to be a great home base for you. So anytime you're in your application or in the application portal, if you've lost track of where you are or you want to go back to the main menu, you'll click My Application. So diving into Step 2 of the application, that's the applicant background. So you'll tell us about yourself and your degrees, specifically the degrees that qualify you for the fellowship. So you don't need to tell us every degree you hold, just that one that qualifies you. And then on to Step 3, which is verification. We work with a third-party vendor called ECS to verify what you've shared about yourself and your degree and your citizenship. And so you'll use the applicant ID, which we show on the screen here in red, when you're working with that third-party vendor to verify your information. You'll follow their instructions, and then please only do this step once per application cycle, even if you're applying to 2 program areas. And then we'll be on to step 4, program area selection, which is a very important step. This is where you'll have the ability to select 1 or 2 of the program areas listed. So we've been talking all about congressional fellowships today. So if you're interested in a congressional fellowship, you'd select legislative branch as one of your 2 program area applications. Once you have selected your 2 program area applications, this page will redirect you back to that My Application page we talked about. And you would then see, in addition to those steps 1 through 4, you'll now see program area applications listed there as well. And so you've unlocked steps 5 through 8 of your application. And so you'll want to make sure you're scrolling down to see each of those program area applications. And steps 5 through 8 are where the majority of your time and energy are likely going to be spent. This is where you'll enter references in step 5, and then essays and applicant skills and interests in step 6. And you might notice that steps 6 through 8 are grayed, and that's because they're locked until you select your references. And so you'll want to do that as soon as possible to unlock where you can enter your essays. So within your legislative branch program area application, within step 6 at the bottom, after you've written you've selected your policy interests and written your essay prompts for your legislative branch placements, you will see this prompt. Are you interested in being considered for a legislative branch fellowship in climate science in addition to the traditional legislative branch fellowships? And so if you are interested in being considered for that 3rd placement this year, you'll click yes, and then it's going to unlock this essay prompt box where you will be asked to tell us about your interests and relevant experience in climate science. And I believe there's a 1,500 character limit for that. And so that is at the bottom of step 6 in your legislative branch application, and it's a slightly an additional essay that you'll write, just sharing a bit more context about your interest in the placement. And I believe we had a question from one of you in our chat about even if you don't have expertise in climate or a climate-related degree, can you still apply to the legislative branch placements? And the answer is yes. There's still the 2 other placements as well that you are welcome to apply for, in addition to this climate-focused placement. And so when you are ready and you've completed steps 1 through 8 of your application, you'll have an opportunity to review, and then you'll hit submit. And the status of your applications will always appear on that My Application homepage. And I want to note that there are 2, if you have 2 program area applications, you'll need to submit each of those separately. So with that, I'm going to pause, invite Christine if she wants to come and join me again. And I know we just shared a lot of information, and so we'll dedicate the rest of our time together to your questions about the application. And I see questions. So yes, so I see a question about exactly what we were kind of just talking about. So we have this one climate science related fellowship and clarifying about applying to the other placements. And somebody's asking to clarify, if you don't have a climate science related background, can you apply to this 3rd position? And I don't know, Christine, if you're willing to shed some light on how we're thinking about climate related degrees, because we know a lot of different fields and disciplines can contribute to knowledge about and informing climate related decisions.
Thanks, Jessica. Yes, so while we've developed this pathway, particularly to try and capture ocean and climate scientists, there are a wealth of disciplines that intersect with climate science that would certainly be valid to include. So when you are going through the application, Jessica mentioned that there would be an additional written prompt after clicking off your interest on the climate fellowship. You'll then want to describe a little bit more detail. If you're, what is your intersection with climate science? Whether or not you're a climate scientist, perhaps there's a nutrition or agriculture intersection that you'd like to explore. So that's going to be your opportunity to share that with the reviewers of your application just demonstrate how you are planning to use this fellowship opportunity to create either the intersection with climate science or to further develop, with your expertise in climate science, your policy understanding.
And I'll add as well, Christine, and because I went by it pretty quickly, but I know that when in that prompt for the climate science fellowship placement, we try to make it really clear that, clicking yes and I'm submitting that essay there doesn't impact in any way their consideration for the other two placements in the legislative branch as well.
Absolutely. We want to include those climate scientists in consideration for those other two positions. But again, we just wanted to spotlight particularly ocean and climate science as great needs on Capitol Hill. I'm definitely seeing that this year. We've just now, we're wrapping up our placements for the current fellowship cohort. And so many offices are seeking energy and environment related and climate related specialties in their offices, because with the Inflation Reduction Act passing, now there's a lot of emphasis on, we need to actually spend the money that we've promised in that aforementioned bill. So while the bill has sort of promised a lot of money that's going to get spent, Congress actually has to allocate that money. That's the appropriations process. So they're really looking for a lot of good expertise and good input to make sure that they're putting money in the right places.
Thanks, Christine, and thanks for the great questions. We also have a question about, are there any additional references or the materials needed separately for the climate science position? And my understanding is no, those references that you enter as part of your core legislative branch program area application will also be the references that are connected to this climate science placement. Is that right, Christine?
That's correct. And, just to also, indicate that if you're applying for other than the legislative branch, you will have a chance to customize your executive branch or judicial branch applications as part of that process through the portal. So you do have some customization that is available through the portal, but there's no customization needed within the legislative branch placements.
Thank you. And I think that connects to another question we had about if somebody is applying to two branches, do you need two different sets of references? And, for that, you have the option to use different individuals for references for your two program area applications. That's part of the reason why they're separated, is that we want to give you, the applicant, that opportunity to select people who are a good fit for each branch. So if you were selecting executive and legislative, you might choose different individuals, or you might choose the same three individuals for both program area applications as well. And just know that for your references, they are welcome to submit a single letter that can go into detail about your fit for the program and can go into detail, if they would like, about each program area and your fit, or can be a general letter that just broadly describes your fit for the fellowship. Anything else to add about letters, Christine, or suggestions?
No, just to make sure that your reviewers, so your references are sending in letters that are written to the fellowship. We have seen sometimes repurposed letters. And we really do want to strongly emphasize that when you're in communication with your references, to make sure they're directed to this fellowship program.
Thanks, Christine. Okay, we have a question about CVs, advice for how to best format the CV for this application. I know we get this question pretty regularly. I can share that, we have a 5-page CV limit, and so that is something I want to kind of raise up and highlight for you as you think about putting together your CV, because that might be a bit different than how it looks now. But beyond that, we don't have specific formatting requirements or expectations. It's really another space for you to think about how you're evaluated as an applicant and decide what you would like to showcase for the reviewers. Anything else you have seen or you would recommend, Christine?
So our selection committee members do take a close look at the CVs because they want to see how you have progressed in your career, however short or long it may be. And they do assess based on appropriateness to your career level. So for those of you who may not have too many publications on your docket just yet, rest assured that committee members are aware that at different points in your career, there'll be different expectations for things like publications, but definitely include as much context and as many materials and activities on there that demonstrate your progression within your career. And hopefully you'll also have a couple of items to add about sort of your intersection with policy in whatever context. Maybe it's graduate student government or working in your community. They definitely like to see those opportunities as well.
We have a question about, are retired individuals allowed to apply? And the answer is like, yes, absolutely. Christine, I'm wondering if you have any perspective on fellows who are mid or senior career who have served as legislative branch fellows.
Absolutely. One of our fellows a couple of years ago said that he treated himself to the fellowship as his retirement gift, that he had served for so many years working for Verizon and its predecessor companies, back to the bills. And after all those years of industry work, he really wanted to see the perspective from the policymakers' side. And he had a lot to contribute to the office in which he served. He was bringing his technology expertise, but in a different area to an office that was exploring more space and space weather applications, which was kind of interesting for him. So he was able to really, choose an office and a placement based on his interests, but bringing, again, some technical expertise to the table that the office was going to be able to use as he's exploring a different topic that was, pretty far away from the telecom experience that he brought. So for those of you who are later in your career, you have a lot to offer on Capitol Hill, and I hope you'll consider it as you are moving through your career.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you so much for that question. Love seeing the range of questions and folks who are joining us today, and that there isn't one right time to contribute as a fellow. So I see one more question, and it relates to just general eligibility and thinking about, for folks who may not yet be eligible to apply through STPF. We have these wonderful partner societies that we work with. And again, Christine, I'm wondering if you have any sort of pitch or recommendation for folks who are considering partner societies, and I can put a link to them in our chat as well for the audience to take a look at.
Sure. So partner societies largely have the same eligibility criteria as AAAS, but there can be some nuances. So for example, at least one partner society does sponsor fellows who are not U.S. citizens. So that is a criteria that AAAS has, but that the sponsoring society does not have. So it's definitely worth exploring our partners and their application requirements, because they can differ. And we want to give you, the applicant, as many bites at the apple as possible in terms of securing an opportunity to bring your skills and your talents to Capitol Hill. So please do look at the Partner Society applications. The links to the Partner Societies are now in the chat box, but you'll have to go society by society to look at their eligibility requirements. We don't have an inventory list, unfortunately, on our website, but we definitely encourage you to explore those opportunities.
Thank you, Christine. And I think maybe we have our last question before we say goodbye for the afternoon, which is pointers for good essays. I think maybe I can start by saying, even though the essays are in step 6 and are locked when you begin your application, we actually do outline all of the essay prompts in the step-by-step application overview. And so you could see those right now. So I recommend anybody who maybe isn't yet at step 6 in their application to go and look at those essay prompts now and begin crafting responses to them, because I do think they are very clear and get at some of the core issues that we're hoping to understand about our applicants and understand about why you're interested in science policy at this point in your career. Christine, any additional thoughts on good essay advice?
Sure. So as a few of the fellows mentioned in the chat today, serving on Capitol Hill requires a very special kind of person. And we need to see that shine in the essays. A couple of ways that you can telegraph that you have that personality and that drive is to make sure that you're not tailoring your essay too tightly to a specific interest area or policy area. selection committee members are looking for people who are a bit flexible and can adapt to the situation in front of them. And even if you were to get a placement on a committee about a particular topic, there's still a lot of versatility that you might be called upon to show. And so the committee members want to see that through your application materials. And so being able to, talk about your fellowship goals and your interests in learning more about policy and its intersection with politics on Capitol Hill is important. But again, try not to limit yourself too much, keeping yourself sort of open and flexible to the opportunities and exciting activities that you could be engaged on through the fellowship year.
Well, thank you all. We have reached our hour together. I want to thank you for joining us. All of our panelists are off doing important things, wonderful things. We want to thank them for sharing all their experiences with us. And in the coming days, we will send you all a recording of this conversation and resources to support an application. And then if you enjoyed this conversation and want more, we hope you can join us in 2 weeks on October 13th for Ask a Fellow Anything. It will be the final chat in our live chat series before the application deadline on November 1st. And if we couldn't get to your question today, or if you think of another question and you want to reach us, you can email us at fellowships@AAAS.org or reply to any of our emails that we've sent you about this conversation. So thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see your application by November 1st. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Christine.